All right, it's time now for Focus. Today we're looking at how the European Union and Libya are working together on the migrant crisis. As part of Operation Sophia, the EU's anti-migrant trafficking operation, officers in the Libyan Coast Guard have been trained by Italy to intercept and rescue migrant boats near the Libyan coast before they reach international waters. Natalia Mendoza and Charlotte Daven-Wetten report.
Valletta Port on the island of Malta, a popular destination for the Mediterranean cruise ships. But today, there is a more conspicuous vessel. It's the San Giorgio, one of the flagships of the Italian Navy, but also one of the 5 ships of the naval division that is joining the European mission Sophia. One of their principal objectives is to bring an end to human trafficking in the Mediterranean. On board, the orders are flying.
140, 130.
Because it is time for departure. In the control room, alongside the Italian naval officers, there is an unusual additional presence. Several Libyan coast guards. They are not aboard by chance. Since last November, they have been undergoing training under the guidance of the European Naval Force.
We taught them to be ready to do all the job of a Coast Guard. This is the main aim of the training, giving them all the capabilities to start again to control their territorial water.
Because Libyan waters are not accessible to European patrol boats. But this is the main departure point in Africa for illegal immigrants heading to Europe.
I can take information for another ship.
Yes.
I bought.
We have also the contact radar of all the ship with the speed, with our speed and our 6 knots.
Mustafa comes from Tripoli. He joined the Libyan Coast Guards after the fall of Gaddafi's regime in 2011. Today, he is hoping that this training will help the country regain control of its maritime border.
The people trafficking, all the trafficking that goes on at sea, the illegal immigration and the victims from shipwrecks. We are hoping to reduce these problems. Oh, Mohammed, come here.
The lesson has started again on deck.
Come on.
The first of these lessons is first aid, because these officers must be able to give assistance to migrants in difficulty.
Il massaggio cardiaco serve per la prevenzione dei danni anossici cerebrali.
Actions that they must put into practice in the case of shipwrecks in Libyan waters, an occurrence that some of them have already experienced. All these officers have been selected from the government of national accord of Fayez al-Sarraj. Beyond the classroom, there is also technical training. Today, these 2 Libyan officers are practicing on a ship's motor. The objective, to know in detail each part of the motor. In a little while, they will be alone at sea and must be ready to deal with any eventuality.
They are in the process of dismantling the motor. We teach them to look at all the different components and understand how they work.
Understand how it operates, but also patrol at sea and carry out controls of suspect activity off the coast. Training that the Libyan Navy have not had since the fall of the Gaddafi regime due to lack of means. The final part of training goes beyond the field of navigation. Due to accusations of mistreatment of migrants by humanitarian NGOs, the Libyan Navy is also trained in the respect of human rights.
On such points, when we compare Sharia law with human rights, they coincide 100%. But unfortunately, neither Islamic law nor human rights are applied to these refugees in Muslim countries.
A message that would appear to have been accepted by this officer. a Coast Guard since 2015.
The lessons on human rights were very interesting. There were concepts that we were unaware of, and it has taught us how to treat refugees. What we've learned here, we will definitely put into practice when we get back.
Training is coming to an end. This morning, the crew of the San Giorgio are in full uniform. The 89 Libyan recruits are at last ready to receive their diploma, in the presence of the head of European diplomacy.
Today, we turn the page, marking the beginning of a new era between the European Union and Libya. This will have to continue because the times ahead of us will be challenging still.
Over the next few months, Italy will be handing over 3 patrol ships to Libya. They will help the Libyan Navy to better control the human trafficking. In 2016, more than 363,000 people have arrived in Europe by way of the Mediterranean.
Joining me now on the line from London is Mattia Toaldo. He's a policy fellow for the European Council on Foreign Relations, Middle East and North Africa programme. Hello, thank you very much indeed for your time. Now, to what extent can these 89 officers in the Libyan Coast Guard help solve the EU's migrant problem?
Well, it's a good program. We've seen that these officers were, for the first time in their life, exposed to the existence of human rights. But of course, the scope and the ambitions of these programs should be limited, especially on the European side. We are talking about 89 officers of a Coast Guard that at the moment has only 2 proper ships. It will probably get 3 more. And what it can do will be always limited in a country where there are 3 governments, none of which actually rules the country, and where the local population has different challenges. And for sure, controlling migrations to Europe is not on top of their priorities. On top of that, there is the fact...
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to ask if the Libyan Coast Guard even controls the coastline.
Well, some parts of the Libyan Coast Guard control some parts of the coastline. Whether they are the major actor on that part of the coastline, that's very much open to questions. There have been news reports that parts of the Coast Guard are, in cahoots with parts of the people smuggling business as well. So there are many, many questions on how this program in itself can be the answer to the problem.
It sounds like the EU is really just trying to keep people away from the continent, also trying to save lives. But wouldn't you say that, a rather cynical view would be that it's more about keeping people away than helping them?
Oh, for sure. Even though you will never find this expression in official EU documents, the intent is to keep the flow of migrants from Africa as close to zero as possible. And of course, building up the capacity of the Libyan Coast Guard means that more people are saved by the Libyan Coast Guard. And therefore, instead of going to Europe, they're brought back to Libya, from where they cannot apply to come to Europe, because Libya is not a party to the Geneva Convention. And in fact, the word refugee does not even exist in Libyan domestic legislation. So the more we prop up the Libyan Coast Guard, the less migrants we have in Europe. But we should be realistic about the outcome of this, because the Libyan Coast Guard is only so much capable of doing that with all the training we're giving them.
Now, you mentioned before how there are various governments. It's really a very unstable country, Libya. So you've got critics saying that it's actually inhumane to help Libya keep migrants there.
Yes, of course it is. Libya is for sure not a safe country, not even for Libyans. And we're lucky we did not have flow of Libyan refugees because they simply went to Tunisia and Egypt. They didn't come to Europe, and many of them came to Europe as dual citizens. For instance, in the city from where I'm talking, there are a lot of dual Libyan UK citizens, and that's why we don't classify them as refugees. Most refugees who arrive in Europe from Libya tell of abuse, of rape, of violence, of being starved into these detention centers where they're not even registered by the local authorities. And even speaking of local authorities is a bit of a joke if we think that most detention centers are not even under the control of the Libyan government.
Tell us more about these centres, though, because I understand that the EU, as part of its plan, it wants to open identification centres for migrants, or at least help Libya set them up.
That's the most ambitious part, to use a euphemism, of the EU plan. At the moment, IOM and UNHCR, the two UN agencies tasked with migrants and refugees respectively, have a hard time having their protection officers enter these detention centers. As I was mentioning before, most of the detention centers in Libya are not managed by the government. There is no registration. There is no respect for basic human rights. And basically, these are just part of the smuggling business. Migrants are caught by militias, brought into the detention centers, and freed only upon payment of ransom. So to think that from kidnapping centers, these places become places where people apply for asylum is a considerable leap forward in imagination.
So what's the EU doing, or what should it do to stabilise Libya? Because stability in the region really is what's going to put an end to this migrant problem.
The EU is already doing things which will help in the longer run cut the flows from Libya. The most important thing is to support the Libyan economy, which the EU is already doing, but not enough, of course, because Libya is not just a transit country, it's also a destination country. The more the conditions for migrants and refugees improve in Libya, not just economically, but also in terms of human rights, the more migrants will choose to stay in Libya rather than flee to Europe. According to IOM data, only 56% of the migrants who arrive in Libya have the idea of going to Europe. But then in the end, a larger percentage tries to get to Europe because of the conditions they find in Libya.
OK, we'll leave it there. Mattia Toaldo from the European Council on Foreign Relations, thank you very much indeed for your time.